June 14th, 1940. 11:47 a.m. Bumpy Johnson stood outside City Hall in Lower Manhattan, watching Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's secretary slam the oak door in his face for the third time that week. "The mayor doesn't meet with your kind," she'd said, her voice dripping with contempt. Inside that building, LaGuardia was signing off on a new policy that would shut down every black-owned business in Harlem within 30 days. Police raids, license revocations, health code violations that didn't exist. The number was staggering: 847 businesses. That meant 12,000 jobs gone, families starved out, a community destroyed. Every political boss in New York had told Bumpy the same thing. LaGuardia's untouchable. He's the little flower, the reformer. You can't buy him, you can't threaten him, you can't beat him. Most men would have grabbed a Thompson submachine gun and gone to war. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. What LaGuardia didn't know was that Bumpy had already been inside City Hall for 3 weeks. This is the story of how a man with an 8th-grade education brought the most powerful mayor in America to his knees, without firing a single shot. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Fiorello LaGuardia was in 1940. He wasn't just any politician. At 5'2", the man had built a reputation as a giant killer. He'd taken down Tammany Hall, the most corrupt political machine in American history. President Roosevelt kept him on speed dial. The newspapers called him incorruptible. Time magazine had put him on the cover twice. And he had a particular hatred for what he called the Negro crime element. LaGuardia had already shut down 23 Harlem policy banks in the past 6 months. He'd arrested 167 runners. He'd seized $340,000 in cash. He bragged about it in every speech, using words like cleaning up and exterminating vermin. The white newspapers loved him for it. But Bumpy Johnson had something LaGuardia didn't have: patience and a network of eyes and ears the mayor couldn't even imagine. See, while LaGuardia was busy making speeches about law and order, Bumpy had been studying him. For 8 months, every morning, LaGuardia ate breakfast at the same Italian cafe on Mulberry Street, Giovanni's. Every Thursday, he met with his inner circle at the St. Regis Hotel, room 412. And every Friday night, he had a secret nobody knew about. That secret was about to become Bumpy's leverage. The inciting incident had come 2 weeks earlier. LaGuardia's new policy directive, officially called Commercial Licensing Reform Act, was really just legal theft wrapped in bureaucratic language. The document sat on his desk, ready for his signature on June 17th. If he signed it, Harlem would burn. Not with fire, with starvation. June 11th, 1940. 3 days before the City Hall rejection, Bumpy sat in the back booth of the Rhythm Club on 132nd Street, a glass of cognac untouched in front of him. Across from him sat a woman named Dorothy Kellman. She wore a gray secretary's dress and horn-rimmed glasses. She was 34 years old. She was also LaGuardia's night cleaning supervisor at City Hall, and she'd been on Bumpy's payroll for $75 a week for the past 5 months. "He keeps a second set of books," Dorothy said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Lockbox in the bottom drawer of his desk. I made copies." Bumpy didn't open the envelope. Not yet. What's in them? Payments. From Luciano's people, before Lucky got locked up. And from others. Bumpy lit a cigarette. The incorruptible Mayor LaGuardia is taking mob money? Was past tense. But the dates are all there. 1937 through early 1939. 23 payments, totaling $67,000. Most men would have taken those documents straight to the newspapers. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. He knew exposure would only make LaGuardia fight harder. A cornered animal bites deepest. What Bumpy needed wasn't to destroy the mayor. He needed to own him. Over the next 3 days, Bumpy set his plan in motion. First, he had 6 copies of those documents made. One went to a safety deposit box in a Bronx bank under a false name. One went to Stephanie St. Clair, the most feared woman in Harlem. One went to Bumpy's attorney with instructions to mail it to the FBI if Bumpy didn't check in by June 20th. The other 3 stayed in Bumpy's jacket pocket. Second, he arranged a meeting with someone LaGuardia trusted, Thomas Dewey, the ambitious district attorney who'd sent Lucky Luciano to prison. Dewey hated LaGuardia's guts, professional jealousy between 2 publicity hounds, but publicly they smiled for the cameras. Bumpy sent word through a corrupt police captain named Sullivan. Tell Dewey that if LaGuardia falls, there's a vacuum. And vacuums get filled by men who know when to make the right friends. The message was clear: help Bumpy, and Dewey would have a clear path to the governor's mansion. Third, and this was the piece that showed Bumpy's genius, he did nothing publicly. No threats, no calls, no messages to LaGuardia at all. He simply made sure the mayor heard whispers. A bartender at Giovanni's cafe mentioned to LaGuardia's driver that some Harlem guy has been asking questions about the mayor's finances. A secretary at the St. Regis told LaGuardia's chief of staff she'd seen a colored gentleman in an expensive suit asking about room 412 records. Bumpy was lighting small fires in LaGuardia's mind, making him paranoid, making him wonder. That's when Bumpy walked into City Hall on June 14th, knowing he'd be refused. The refusal wasn't a setback. It was part of the plan. Because that night, at 11:30 p.m., while LaGuardia sat in his study at Gracie Mansion, nursing a scotch and wondering what that Harlem gangster really knew, Bumpy was already making his next move. June 15th, 1940. 7:22 a.m. Mayor LaGuardia's driver pulled up to Giovanni's cafe on Mulberry Street. Same as every morning. But something was different. Bumpy Johnson sat at the mayor's usual table by the window, eating eggs and reading the Times. He wore a charcoal gray suit, burgundy tie, and a fedora tilted just so. The morning sun caught the gold of his cufflinks. The owner, Giovanni himself, looked terrified. LaGuardia froze in the doorway. For 5 long seconds, nobody moved. The cafe went silent. For other customers stopped eating. A waitress held a coffee pot in midair. Then LaGuardia walked straight to the table. You've got some nerve. Bumpy looked up slowly. Took a sip of coffee. Morning, Your Honor. Join me. I don't break bread with criminals. Then stand. Either way, we're having this conversation. LaGuardia glanced around. His driver stood by the door, hand near his weapon. 2 beat cops had appeared outside. The mayor never traveled without protection. But something in Bumpy's calm made LaGuardia sit. What LaGuardia didn't know was that both cops outside were on Bumpy's payroll. You refused to see me, Bumpy said. I don't negotiate with gangsters. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to explain something you don't understand yet. Bumpy slid the envelope across the table. LaGuardia didn't touch it. That's copies of your payments from the Luciano family. 23 deposits between 1937 and 1939, totaling $67,000. There's also a list of 3 offshore accounts you opened in the Bahamas. The color drained from LaGuardia's face. Those are forgeries. They're certified bank records. I have 6 copies. One's with my attorney with instructions to mail it to J. Edgar Hoover if I don't check in every 48 hours. One's with Thomas Dewey. Bullshit. Dewey would have called you? Why would he? Dewey doesn't love you, Fiorello. He tolerates you. And he'd love to be governor. Funny how these things work. The room was still frozen. Even Giovanni had stopped pretending to wipe down the counter. LaGuardia's hands trembled. What do you want? I want you to understand something. That policy you're signing Monday, the one that shuts down 847 businesses in Harlem, you're not signing it. The hell I'm not. Yes, you are not. Bumpy's voice never rose. That's what made it terrifying. Because if you do, these documents go to every newspaper in New York by Tuesday morning. The Times, the Herald, the Amsterdam News. And then you're not the little flower anymore. You're just another crooked politician who took mob money while prosecuting the very people who paid you. LaGuardia leaned forward. You're threatening me? Me? Do you know what I can do to you? I can have you arrested before you leave this building. I can have every business you touch raided. I can. You can do nothing. Bumpy stubbed out his cigarette. Because I'm already dead according to the system. I'm a black man in a white man's city. I've got no bank account in my real name. No property on paper. No official business licenses. You can't arrest me on anything that'll stick. I'm too careful. You can't seize assets you can't find. You can raid businesses, but they'll rebuild. He leaned back. But you? You're legitimate. You've got a reputation. A political future. Presidential ambitions, from what I hear. All of that disappears the moment those documents hit the papers. That's when LaGuardia understood. He wasn't fighting a gangster. He was fighting a ghost with leverage. What happens after I don't sign the policy? LaGuardia's voice had gone quiet. You make a public statement. Say you've reconsidered after community feedback. Say you're implementing a new small business protection initiative instead, something that sounds good for the papers. And then you leave Harlem alone. For how long? Forever. LaGuardia laughed bitterly. And if I agree, those documents disappear? They stay exactly where they are. Insurance. You keep your word, they never see daylight. You break it. Bumpy stood up, dropped cash on the table for his breakfast. And you learn what it feels like to lose everything in a day. Bumpy walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Fiorello? Monday morning, 9 a.m. You will meet with me in your office. Publicly. With photographers. And you will announce the policy change with me standing next to you. The message needs to be clear. Harlem has a seat at the table now. You arrogant son of a 3 days, Your Honor. You've got 3 days to decide if your pride is worth your career. Bumpy walked out into the June morning. Behind him, Mayor LaGuardia sat alone at the table, staring at the envelope. His hands were shaking. June 17th, 1940. 8:47 a.m. The press room at City Hall was packed. 37 reporters. 8 photographers. Newsreel cameras from Path and Movietone. Nobody knew why the mayor had called an emergency press conference. At 9:02 a.m., the doors opened. Mayor LaGuardia walked in first. Then Bumpy Johnson, in the same charcoal suit, walked in beside him. The room exploded with flashbulbs. LaGuardia stood at the podium, his face a mask of controlled rage. After careful consideration and extensive dialogue with community leaders, he glanced at Bumpy. I've decided to withdraw the Commercial Licensing Reform Act. Instead, we'll be implementing a small business protection and growth initiative to support entrepreneurship in all of New York's communities. The reporters shouted questions. LaGuardia ignored them. He shook Bumpy's hand for the cameras. The handshake lasted 3 seconds. To the photographers, it looked like unity. But Bumpy felt how hard LaGuardia was squeezing, the mayor's final, futile act of defiance. When their hands separated, Bumpy leaned in close. Pleasure doing business with you, Your Honor. LaGuardia said nothing. But his eyes said everything. I will bury you for this. Bumpy smiled slightly. I look forward to our continued cooperation. By noon, the Amsterdam News had the headline, Harlem leader meets with mayor, business crackdown canceled. By evening, every policy banker, numbers runner, and small business owner in Harlem knew what had happened. Bumpy Johnson had walked into City Hall and walked out with a victory. No guns, no violence, just intelligence, patience, and leverage. The immediate consequences were seismic. LaGuardia never touched Harlem businesses again. The raid stopped. The health code violations disappeared. The police captains who'd been zealous enforcers suddenly found new priorities. And Bumpy's reputation transformed overnight. He wasn't just a street enforcer anymore. He was a power broker. Other communities, Italian, Irish, Jewish, started reaching out. If Bumpy could back down LaGuardia, maybe he could help them too. Suddenly, Bumpy had leverage across all 5 boroughs. But there was a cost. Thomas Dewey, sensing opportunity, began investigating LaGuardia quietly. Not enough to prosecute. Dewey didn't want the documents to go public either, but enough to keep the mayor paranoid and weakened. And LaGuardia, humiliated, became even more dangerous in his final years in office. He couldn't attack Harlem directly anymore, but he found other ways to strike. Zoning changes, infrastructure neglect, budget cuts to schools and hospitals in black neighborhoods. The war had simply gone underground. But on the evening of June 17, 1940, Bumpy Johnson sat in the Rhythm Club with a glass of cognac, surrounded by community leaders who finally understood. Real power wasn't about who had the most guns. It was about who had the information. One moment stands out. Around 11 p.m. that night, a young man approached Bumpy's table. He couldn't have been more than 19. His name was Malcolm Little. He'd later be known as Malcolm X. Mr. Johnson, Malcolm said, "Can I ask you something?" Bumpy gestured to a chair. How'd you know he'd fold? Bumpy lit a cigarette, considered the question. I didn't, but I knew something more important. What he'd lose if he didn't. See, the mayor had power because people believed he was incorruptible. Take away that belief, and he's just another politician. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to make him understand that I could. Malcolm nodded slowly. So it wasn't about the documents. The documents were the gun, son. But I never had to fire it. The threat was enough. That's the lesson. Most battles are won before the first punch is thrown. 15 years later, in 1955, LaGuardia was long dead. But Bumpy Johnson was still standing. He'd survived mob wars, police crackdowns, federal investigations, and prison sentences. And whenever young hustlers came to him asking how to gain respect, Bumpy would tell them the same story. In 1940, I faced a man who had everything I didn't: political power, legal authority, public support, and I beat him without throwing a punch. You know how? They'd shake their heads. I beat him by knowing what he valued more than his pride, his legacy. Find what a man values most, and you control him. That's real power. June 14th to June 17th, 1940. 3 days. That's how long it took for a Harlem street lieutenant to bring the most powerful mayor in America to his knees. Bumpy Johnson faced a man with armies of police, the backing of Washington, and a reputation as incorruptible. And he won. Not with violence, not with money, with intelligence, with patience, with the understanding that every powerful man has something to lose. You just have to find it. Real power isn't about the battles you fight. It's about the wars you win without anyone knowing there was a fight. If you believe that intelligence beats brute force every single time, hit that like button and drop a comment. What would you have done if you were Bumpy in that situation? Would you have exposed LaGuardia immediately or played the long game like Bumpy did? Subscribe, because next week, we're covering the time Frank Costello walked into a room with 10 armed men who wanted him dead and walked out with every single one of them working for him. Remember, the most dangerous weapon isn't in your hand. It's in your head.